Welcome everyone to Forward Thinking, my new In Conversation TV series. I'm Associate Professor Art Phillips, and today's focus is entrepreneurship and work integrated learning. We have a very special guest today, Tony Austin Rees. Tony is a unique entrepreneur with strong leadership and managerial skill sets. Born in the UK and relocated to Australia some 35 years ago, Tony began his career establishing and managing Como Mirrors in Double Bay, Sydney. He then pioneered the first domestic property styling company in Australia in the late 90s and led the organization for over 20 years, being a respected leader in the market. He's also a successful model and has followed in his father's footsteps, William Edward Rees, as a creative artist and innovator. Both Tony and his father William have works that have debuted in many art galleries around the world. Tony recently published a book entitled Everybody Loves an Artist, which is available on Kindle, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later today. Without further ado, a very warm welcome to Tony Austin Rees.
Lovely to
be here. Good afternoon.
Art.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming. And
thanks a lot.
To our little show, which is really focused for up-and-coming entrepreneurs and students to actually sort of realize real-life experiences from somebody as yourself who has had a lot of different areas that you've actually worked in. And so it'll be an interesting chat with you. I know a little bit about you because we've been friends for a few years, but I think I'll be learning a lot more about things of your past that I haven't been aware of. So I'm looking forward to this. So when you actually first came to Australia and you started the company Como Mirrors, you managed that. Talk a little bit about that and the skill sets that were actually involved with running that company for over 20 years.
Right, yeah. I was always really interested in art and framing, actually. I used to love water gilding and oil gilding, which is gold leafing. And so I always had an interest in presenting art. And that led me to opening, a picture framing business, which in itself is a very practical thing, but I wanted to take it a little step further and I started to design mirrors. And I realized that all the effort you put into a picture frame, if you're going to gold leaf it and all the rest of it, you may as well put a mirror in there because you can get a lot more money for it. That was the motivation initially. And I ended up doing a lot of designer mirrors, which ended up in Vogue, and the Rolling Stones even ended up having one in their room.
Oh,
so
really?
When they stayed in the Intercontinental, yeah. So that's how that creative process started. And when I was designing different things and presenting them, one thing led to another. And I ended up with a showpiece store, which attracted all sorts of different opportunities. And I met a lot of really interesting people who used to come in and chat about other innovative projects.
Right, okay, yeah.
So it was
So the framing company, you thought it would be a great idea to expand it, putting mirrors in the same style frames, yeah? That was the idea.
Quite often you can put a lot of effort into a picture frame, and when you put the painting in it, the mirror, the actual frame should really be secondary, because it's the artwork that should be the prominent thing. Now, if you make a really ornate frame, quite often, to put a mirror in there, then you can make more of the frame. Because really you should tone down a frame so that the artwork stands out. It should just complement the artwork.
Yeah, no, right.
And some of my frames were getting a bit over the top for an artwork, so I would put mirrors in there, and that was really successful.
Okay, so were you actually hands-on in terms of the manufacturing of this product, or you had other people working for you and you guided them, you designed it? What was your...
Well, I had a bit of both. I had some people doing a lot of the prep work, and I was designing them, but I was also hands-on. And at that time, I did how-to videos and gilding kits, which were used to teach other people how to do it. So I sort of started expanding the brief even back then.
Okay, so that sounds like it was probably even before YouTube happened, right? In terms of
yes, it was a big cassette we had to do.
Right. Okay.
We had it all professionally filmed, and
yeah, no fan. And you sold those too, or
well,
was that a?
We didn't sell very many, but the idea was there. But that was one of these. Not every project works out, and
sure, yeah.
We did a really great gilding kit with the video in there and everything. but that was very early days, and I really didn't think it through completely, which is really interesting for entrepreneurs, because when you do have a project or an idea, I think a lot of the work has to be in research and preparation, so you don't put too much effort in the wrong direction.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because one of my earlier questions on my little cards here, because I come a little bit prepared, but was talk to us about working with an idea, getting the idea into a format, et cetera, and taking it to launch time, and the criticalness of that time span, and where do you start? And then where do you go in terms of, when you're sure that you're ready to actually launch the idea?
Yeah, well, I'm always thinking about different things, and quite often you've only got to go onto the internet and realise that 50 other people have done it before you. So that idea is, dead in the water.
Well, yeah.
But if you do, when I had good ideas that I thought would develop, I would really, really do my research before I put any money into it.
Yeah.
And I think an old friend of mine once said to me, he said, it's very easy to be buyer, but very hard to be seller. And in a basic fashion, he was right, because you can put a lot of money into a project, and if it doesn't work, you could have saved all that if you'd just done a little bit more research.
Yeah.
If you tested it out. I know someone who started a big storage company, and the way he did it, he had the idea of an inner city storage company. And so what he did to test the market before he invested in any real estate, he basically put ads in the papers. It wasn't very expensive. He put ads in the newspapers for inner city storage, and he was inundated with requests. Of course, he had to say, sorry, we're full or whatever. However, he realised that was a really good idea, and then that gave him the confidence to move forward and invest in the project. But he did the research beforehand. Even though it did cost him a bit of money, it was well worth it.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting way of actually doing it, to find out what your clients, what sort of clients you're going to get.
Yeah.
Who you're going to lure into buying your product. Yeah. So, research is really important. And I think back in the 80s and 90s, when you first moved here and actually started Como Mirrors, we didn't have Google. We didn't have those areas to actually sort of research and see who our competitors were. We'd have to go out there and, pave this, walk the streets to figure out what's going on. I'll look in the yellow pages to find out what competitors you actually had. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I did, which actually a lady from Vogue came into my shop one day, and it was her job to find stories for each issue of Vogue Living. And this particular segment was making things for the interiors out of clothing. So I chose a round mirror with lots of football socks dipped in gold, and then also dipped in plaster of Paris. So it became a sunburst mirror. It was beautiful, and you couldn't tell that they were socks, because they were all kind of shaped in the way of flames. And I put a mirror in there, and that was featured. And she did say, look, if ever you get an idea, please let us know. So all of the magazines, whatever field you're in, there's a magazine on it.
Yeah.
Generally, you can call those editors and say, look, I've got this idea, and quite often they'll take you on board. If it's a good idea, they'll come and do an editorial. It's the best free advertising.
Well, that's marketing,
and that's what I did.
Yeah.
I've got lots of these from different magazines. They're really all from just a phone call saying, what do you think about this idea? And quite often they'll run with it. And the only negative is that you've got to wait about 3 months for the issue to come out. However, it is really good free advertising if ever you want to go down that track.
Absolutely, yes. So that actually worked really, really well for you in those days, yeah?
It did, yeah.
Okay.
It got a lot of publicity, and it all helps.
No. So what was the size of your company there in Double Bay? How much stock would you sell?
It was a boutique shop.
Okay.
And it was just an average size shop, but it was crammed with gold mirrors and artworks and pieces of furniture too.
Yeah, so being in the eastern suburbs of Double Bay, it must have attracted the locals who have a bit of extra cash on hand sometimes. And so tell me, what sort of clients were actually coming in?
A lot of interior decorators would come in. and for their clients.
Yes.
And they'd place orders because, you know, it was a sort of a bespoke business, so I could make things to measure and that type of thing.
Okay, so did that lead into your later innovative idea of actually creating the InStyle sort of company, which was called
Before and After.
Before and After. Good name. Good name. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'd been in Double Bay for about 3 or 4 years, and I used to get property developers coming in to buy stock for display apartments, and I asked a couple of them, why don't you just rent, you know, an artwork or a mirror? And they said, oh no, we wouldn't do that. You know, nobody wanted to take responsibility. That's what gave me the idea, and I thought, wow, you know, this would really help them.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
You know, because rather than buying one mirror, you know, they could rent everything, and when I thought the business through, and this is a good point for a lot of businesses, you know, it's got to benefit everybody. You know, any deal that isn't good for everybody involved in the deal is not a good deal. And
okay.
I thought this one through, and I thought, well, the property developer or the house seller is going to benefit because the house will look better.
Yeah.
The agent's going to benefit
That's
because
right.
it's going to look better in the shots, and they'll probably get a higher price
Yep.
because they're maximising the space. I'm really happy because I'm selling them my stock and I'm getting it back again in 6 weeks. And so everyone's happy. So that was the incentive for me to move forward and mention it to a real estate friend of mine. And he said, I've got a house. So that was my first job.
So that was a launching pad, yeah?
That was the launch pad, yeah.
Nowadays, we're all used to that because we go to sell a house and the real estate agent says, yeah, well, I think you should style that or whatever. You know, so there's a lot of different stylists like you started,
Yeah.
you know, nowadays. But in the early days, you were really a exceptional, you know, sort of innovator for that concept idea. And so that would have allowed you then to start to think about design, I guess, and you must have a really, really good eye, especially because you're an artist and a painter as well. You must have a really, really good eye for looking at a room and saying, this is what it probably needs, yeah? So that's one aspect I wanted to talk about. And the second part of the question is then, how do you decide what to put in there and where do you get your stock?
Right. Well, when I first started the business, it's really important, that type of business, not to you know, go broke buying stock, because you can do. And
Yeah.
I had that particular business, I had to build up really slowly. So, you know, the cost of a full household of furniture is quite a lot because it's got to be good quality.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I would do it gradually. So I would, but if I had another job, I would slowly pace myself. So I wouldn't overinvest. I just slowly build up, and that's what I did with Before and After.
Right.
And
How would you know what to get?
well, generally, I was focusing on one type of house initially, which was a Paddington Terrace house, and then it expanded from there to different properties. You know, big homes on the North Shore eventually, and mansions on the water. So it was a slow build up, but I started by focusing on one area.
Yep.
And really monopolizing that area. Di Jones was a real estate agency which is still around.
Sure.
But in the very early days, she was one of the first agents to go to an owner and say, look, if you want to sell your house, you're going to have to cut that lawn, trim that tree, you know, paint it, do this. And a lot of the agents didn't do it many years ago. They would just sell it as it was.
Yeah.
But she used to insist on improving it, and she was my first client as an agency that I used to do regular work for.
Yeah.
And she set the bar for a lot of the agents in Sydney, and now, you know, they're all beautifully presented. And,
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so you would have obviously had to have built your inventory as you went along, but very, very smart that you focus on one particular area and then you grew from there, so you didn't overcapitalize and you made sure it was going to work. You know, risk taking is what we're talking about, and you know, I mean, how to mitigate that risk for yourself, and that's actually how you did it. But then you would have had to have a storage facility or a place. I mean, is there a showroom for people to go look, or do they allow you to just do what you want and you have choices available in your warehouse?
Well, initially, you know, that was another reason I didn't buy too much stock, because I didn't have I didn't want the expense of a warehouse to store everything.
Yeah.
So I had a 3-story terrace in Paddington. It was all in the downstairs area in the garage.
Yeah,
so
sure.
it built up from there. And so as soon as my inventory was building up, my jobs were building up, so I had more capital.
Sure.
So I then invested more into storage and eventually bought my own warehouse. And the way of picking furniture, it's not really that hard, because the furniture I picked was timeless furniture. So I didn't pick anything too radical that would go out of date, any crazy colours. I used to add colours with artworks. So the furniture would be a bit beige, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Not literally, but
Sure.
middle of the road.
Yeah.
So it was safe furniture, and I'd add a bit of pizzazz with artworks and that type of thing.
Okay, because your specialty is right, is the artwork and the framing. That's your background. So that would be like the add-on to really make a big difference in terms of the styling, I guess.
It does make a big difference, yeah. And mirrors especially. You know, you can open up a room and make it lighter and make a big difference by basically stripping all of the inherited furniture, which is too big and too bulky and too dark, and then replacing it with smaller, lighter and more appropriate furniture for the actual architecture.
The homeowner then has to find a place to store all their furniture when you move it. So do you provide that service, or that's a whole different thing?
No, we did in the end, but that was generally when people were selling properties that we were dressing. A lot of them were investment properties, so they were already empty.
Okay, yeah.
And if they needed to, people needed to, we used to do partials. And in those situations, we'd say, store it in Kennards or wherever. And that's what they would do independently. We didn't want to get into removals. That was a game for people who know what they're doing in that respect.
Exactly. So, there's actually risks that we all have with our businesses, and of course we have insurances against those risks. But how would you actually mitigate the risks of people damaging the furniture? Or, how would you handle that situation?
Well, initially, we tried to get insurance for that business, and the insurance companies all said, we'll only insure it within your warehouse, not when it's in somebody else's property that's open and people are coming and going.
I was wondering about this.
So, basically...
you're on your own? Are you on your own?
We had to just take the risk. But we were, honestly, in 20-odd years, if anything was broken, it was minimal. We just used to wear it. It wasn't a problem. There were a couple of robberies, but they were. We found that with robberies, they were generally breaking into new properties, stealing the cookers and things like that. They weren't really interested in stealing furniture. So it was pretty good.
Yeah, interesting investments, assets, because you keep reusing them, I guess. And I guess the lifespan for like a lounge that you would buy, I guess, would be for years, right? Really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, they weren't really getting used.
No, because they don't get a lot.
They last for a long time.
Because there's no really wear and tear, especially if it's an investment property. People really aren't sitting there, in between showings because there's nobody living there. So
the only people that would damage it generally are us moving it. So
okay, yeah. So I assume you had your own truck facilities.
Yes.
Yes.
That was important for that particular business. To rely upon external removalists was a bit of a nightmare. Unreliability and so on. Yeah. Well, sometimes they weren't available, and when you do this business. You've got the real estate agents, you've got a narrow window for photography, everyone's booked in, you can't be late, it has to be done on time, and that was one of the main factors of, and I think many businesses, it's so important, if you say you're going to do something for a certain price, do it, and if something goes wrong, fix it. And that will give you a great reputation. Even when something does go wrong and they see how you fix it, that's a great thing in itself.
No, well, that's right.
Instead of trying to shirk it, you just get it done. And people love to work with people. They can just, in fact, a lot of agents used to say, we love you guys, we just give you the keys and you go and do it. And it's done. So
they trust you to actually do it. Yeah. Do you have to be there for the shoot then, and make sure that everybody's happy with the placement of the furniture? And are you all a part of that?
No. When we worked for an agent, a few times, they realised we know what we're doing. So, and we did know in the end, very quickly actually, where things should go to maximize the room. If there were any changes needed, we could just easily come in and change it.
Yeah. So
Part of the service.
how much would you be given a brief, or as you said, they say to you now that they know you, just walk in and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
So that's your design, and I guess you also worked with your partner for a long time on, with that. But in the early days, I mean, were they actually giving you a concise brief if that's what they wanted to achieve, and you had to follow that brief?
No, not really, because
Never.
we would dress a property for the architecture and the demographic of the buyer. I'll give you an example. If it was a 3-story building with no lift, we wouldn't dress it in a traditional sense, because it would be only young people buying it. You won't be getting old people walking upstairs.
Yeah.
So we would dress it a younger style. If it was a big house in Pimble, we'd have more traditional aspects to it as well. So
Yeah.
you'd be getting probably more established older clients. So we knew kind of what the demographic was, and we used to get it pretty right most of the time.
Yeah. So being a leader in this particular area, I guess what you would, have seen is that the growth of your company, in the end, because I believe you just recently sold this company as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the end, I mean, how much inventory did you end up having, and what sort of warehouse facilities did you have?
Yeah, well, in the end, we had, I would say, 50 households worth of furniture,
Wow.
plus a lot of other stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
And I used to walk into the warehouse and I'd look at it and I'd break out into a sweat and think, well, I'm storing this lounge. I haven't used it for 15 years, but it's too good to throw away.
Yeah.
Because they're still in good condition, but it's very difficult to sell old furniture. So there was a bit of a dilemma there. About 50 households worth of furniture, a big warehouse in Alexandria.
That's a lot, yeah.
And that was when the business, and a lot of businesses run their course. I was running out of energy, and because I was very hands-on. And also, there were lots of other young, enthusiastic people with all brand new furniture. So to maintain my business, I had to keep growing it.
Sure.
To keep the plates in the air.
Yeah.
And it was getting very, very expensive. But also, with all the added competition, the rates were dropping. And some businesses can go like this. You start off really great. They're very lucrative. But when everyone's doing it, they start dropping their prices. And it kind of lost its shine a bit for us.
Sure, yeah.
Because
a time to move on.
It was time to move on, yes.
Find something else, and the asset itself with the group. So you actually had that company for over, 30-something years?
Well, 24 years.
Yeah?
Yeah, and actually we sold it to a young couple who, they're also property developers as well, so they're doing really well, and we've had really good feedback from the clients. It was really nice to sell a business and hear that they're doing really well, which is great.
So what's next for you? Because, I mean, we've spoken a few times actually over lunch prior to this interview, and, you're always coming up with really unique ideas, and you sort of test the market, and then I've heard from you, no, that's not going to work. You do, but you're always thinking. So do you wake up in the morning with new ideas and thoughts? I'm just wondering, because you always have something in your head about something.
Well, when you're a bit of a creative thinker, it's a bit dangerous because I've got Ingela, my wife, to keep me on the straight and narrow, and but yeah, I just sometimes ideas just come into my head, and I mean, I've done the book, and a lot of my energy will be going into marketing that, and then I paint, and hopefully that'll be my swan song as an artist.
Yeah, so let's talk about your creativity and your artistic work. So it all stemmed from your dad, of course.
Yes.
And your dad is still painting. And
he is 90, still having exhibitions.
Wow, fantastic, yeah. So do you paint more now that you don't have that business, and are you focusing more on that area, and where are you going to go with it? What's your concept?
Yeah, I've now got a lovely studio in Bury, and the whole point of that book was basically to put all the knowledge that I've gathered over the years in all the different all the different sort of ventures in the art world, I just thought it would really, you know, they're not typical techniques or tricks of the trade. They're a little bit things that you wouldn't find on the internet. You know, ways of basic things like cleaning brushes and doing water gilding and things like this.
What type of surfaces to paint on and things of that nature? Is that what you talk about in the book?
Yeah, reusing, you know, for instance, for an example, if you get a canvas with a painting on it, you know, a lot of people would just gesso it with white gesso and they'd see the shadow of the paints coming through. Well, the trick for that is you paint it with black paint.
Right.
So nothing. Then you gesso it. So just handy little tips for somebody starting out, for instance.
Okay. Now there's a chapter on how to ship artwork, unused paint, of varnishing artworks, retouching, framing tips. Yeah, interesting, fantastic. Well, I'm going to have to get myself a copy of this and have a really good read of it. But it looks fantastic. And so your dad must be very, very proud of you for this because.
It is. Well, he's featured in there, so he loves that.
Is he?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
But so growing up with that in that world with him, you know, you're absorbing information all the time, and you know, his journey as an artist, you know, things have gone well, other things have gone really badly when he's come up against, you know, sort of shonky art dealers and things. So it's all in that book, how to prepare yourself. Not, you know, to avoid, you know, unscrupulous dealers and things like that. So there's lots of tips from the artist's perspective to make their life easier.
So the slogan is dozens of valuable tips on how to, and there's videos also.
Yeah, there's QR codes in there which link to how-to videos.
That's great.
And I'm not an avid reader, so, you know, I love to watch a video.
Yeah.
And that's why I've put lots of pictures in that book and lots of videos, because a lot of, you know, creative people would probably prefer to look at a video or an image rather than reading about something. So I've kind of oriented the book in that direction.
Yeah, no, right. So one of the things that we did sort of touch on a little bit was marketing, and the way that you found that was advantageous for you to market was actually getting these Vogue and various magazine sort of interest pages and articles, right? So what was your market spend like, you know, monthly or yearly outside of that for your InStyle company, or was it mostly word of mouth?
Well, it was quite interesting, actually, the marketing for that company. We did put some ads in, and we didn't have much of a response. And I found at the end of the day, to focus on the agents that we knew, this is just for the styling company, just focus on the agents that we knew and really service them. You know, if they gave us a job, we'd give them a bottle of Moe.
Yeah.
It was, you know, $60 or whatever a bottle of Moe is, I don't know, but it was the best. Yeah. And we ended up with a really loyal group of agents. Now, there's another styling company that they're no longer going because they moved on, but they did really, really well. And the way they used to do it, they used to look at the Wentworth Courier, and they'd look at agents who'd sold a property. They would call that agent, even if it wasn't their agent, and so we've been following your progress. Congratulations on the sale. That was a great result.
Yeah.
And just introduce themselves in that manner by giving a compliment.
Sure.
And they got loads of work. And simple things like that. That didn't cost any money.
Yeah.
Our marketing wasn't costing very much. So you don't. I think sometimes it's good to think outside the square with marketing to get really a focused hit on your target market.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you can spend millions in, you know, marketing things, you know, but all depends what the business is, I think. And because it's such a personalized business, and you can go directly to the agents who are the ones out there actually selling the product, which is their houses, and so it makes sense. Yeah.
If it was a digital business, you know, it's great to do mass marketing, and it makes, you know, you can cope with lots of work. But in the styling business, for instance, you can only do so many jobs
No.
a day, so you don't sort of want 50 jobs in a week.
Yeah, exactly. So for the student, the up-and-coming, risk taker,
Yeah.
sort of entrepreneur, sort of in a sentence or two, what sort of advice would you actually give them?
I would say, instead of speaking to friends who will, if they like you, always say what a great idea, which unfortunately is not always true, I would do your research and test the market first. I knew many years ago, I knew a gardener. He specialised in rooftop gardens in London and New York, and he worked for royalty. He worked for stars, movie stars, everybody. And he came in one day to my shop. He'd heard my father had done a couple of life-size bronze horses for the Sultan of Brunei, and he was asking about the contact for the Sultan of Brunei. I said, no, you can't get anywhere close. They've got lots of intermediaries. And I said, why? He said, what I do, I've got a good product. I'm a landscape gardener. I specialise in rooftops. And he said, so I just absolutely pepper the world with my resume, and I contact everybody I can in prominent positions, stars, royalty. And he said, 9 times out of the 10, you won't get anything. But he said, the one time you do, if you're Johnny on the spot, that's it. You're in with that person, and you're probably in with their friends, and then their friends' friends. And he has ended up with a marvellous clientele in New York, a marvellous clientele in London, and Australia too. So, and that was just by basically
being out there,
targeting and being the person on the spot when someone just needs, people, I think generally people, if it's not their field, they like to know that if someone's keen enough to contact you, I will give them a go.
Yeah. Yeah, so, as an entrepreneur, you have to have strong belief in yourself, and you don't take no for an answer, I guess, all the time, but sometimes I guess you have to know when to turn and be realistic. That's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah, there'll be lots of downtimes in an entrepreneur's life, and lots of things that don't work. And that's why I think it's important, when you do pick a project, don't just pick it for financial gain. I think you have to pick something you're passionate about.
There you go.
And then it doesn't really matter if it fails the first few times, because you kind of enjoy it anyway.
Absolutely.
And you'll push through all those negatives, which you get with every new idea.
Of course you do, yeah.
And I think that's probably a good bit of advice. Pick things you're passionate about.
Yeah, so the heart and soul of it all, right? Because you really have to want to do it. I guess you have to wake up, sort of in the middle of the night thinking, yes.
And people see through that.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I think all the success stories are all about that. You just got to be passionate about it. You just got to be passionate about it, because that's what it's all about.
It is. I was in London many years ago, and a friend of mine's brother had been working on the oil rigs in the North Sea.
Right.
And we were really trying to, make money doing whatever. And I said to him, why aren't you still working there? They were on £1,000 or whatever it was. It was huge money. He said, honestly, Tony, he said, when you've got enough money, you don't want to be uncomfortable all the time. You don't want to be doing something you don't really love. Yeah. And that's so true with businesses.
It is so true, yeah. Okay, well, look, thank you very, very much. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do, which I guess you realize, besides the fact that I do some lecturing at a business school called the Universal Business School, which has campuses now in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, is that I'm also the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, which we call CFE for the school, And one of the things that we actually do is make sure that we build our fellowship sort of along the way. We now have about 23, 24 fellows. One of the recent fellows that we got was Janine Ellis. She used to be on Shark Tank, and she's now on Food Stars Australia. And Luke Mangan, who's a chef, and a list of a lot of great sort of entrepreneurs. I'm actually a fellow of the school as well. That's how all that began. Anyway, so I wanted to present you today with a fellowship from the Universal Business School, Sydney. I'm going to just walk over there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
But there you go. So now this means that after your name, Tony Austin Rees, that you can now put FCFE after your name, which stands for Fellow of the Center for Entrepreneurship.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Art.
There you go. And congratulations. Big congratulations, yeah. Okay, well, sort of in conclusion for today, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Love to hear these stories. Just fantastic, really great advice to up and coming risk takers or entrepreneurs. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and until next time, have a great week, month, and I'll talk to you in my next segment that's coming up in about 3 weeks. Thank you very much.